The Mind Invaders, a novel by Dave Hunt, based on an original screenplay by Dave Hunt and T.A. McMahon. Read by T.A. McMahon.
A note from the author. The collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and breakup of the Soviet Union brought a new cooperation between Russia and the West. Former communist countries joined NATO. Even China experimented with modified capitalism. World peace seemed a realistic hope. Forgotten was the warning by Anatoly Golitsyn, one of the highest KGB officials ever to defect, who in 1984 had predicted this very scenario. When the West, duped by quote-unquote peace, had fallen far behind militarily, the trap would be sprung. While Congress canceled America's best defense projects, Russia, hypocritically accusing the United States of pushing the arms race, prepared for war. Her growing fleet of SS-18 Typhoon nuclear subs, too silent for us to track, prowled offshore with their nuclear missiles programmed for American cities. Russia continued to arm Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and held periodic joint maneuvers with Syria for the planned attack upon Israel. The frequent practice of preemptive strikes against the United States using dummy warheads and fake targets, and the increased railing against America by the Orthodox Church and Communist Party hardly pointed to peace. While the State Department and White House slept, the CIA continued its clandestine war with the KGB's successor, the Federal Security Bureau, FSB. Then a lucky break gave America sudden superiority in the most incredible weapon, psychic power. And that is where our story begins. The setting is in the near future. Except where public figures are clearly identified, any similarity to persons living or dead is not intended. Similarity to future events is. It could happen soon. Chapter 1, Contact. You're nearing Omega. Steady now. Let yourself go. We're taking you deeper, deeper. To Ken Inman, already deep in a self-induced trance and strapped into the secret apparatus he had invented, the metallic voice seemed to originate inside his head. Transmuted by electronics from Ken's brainwaves into an amplifier, the robotic voice seemed to come across vast distances of space and time. It echoed eerily throughout the laboratory from a speaker directly above a second figure wearing a white lab coat and poised over the controls of a bank of electronic monitoring equipment. Beneath the thinning gray hair, there were beads of perspiration on the man's broad, high forehead, and the owlish look behind the steel-rimmed glasses betrayed signs of growing nervous excitement. 18 years before, while still in his mid-teens, Ken Inman had graduated summa cum laude from Stanford University. A child prodigy in math, he'd gone on to earn, at age 19, a double Ph.D. at Stanford in both electrical engineering and computer science, a feat unprecedented and unlikely ever to be duplicated. After establishing his own highly successful computer software company, which he still managed, Ken had branched out into psychic research. It was a decision that greatly disappointed some of his former professors, but one that Ken had not made lightly. He convincingly argued with his critics that parapsychology offered more potential for benefit to mankind than any other held. Not a hint, however, did he ever drop of the secret research that had begun to obsess and finally possess him. The search for psychic contact with highly evolved, non-physical intelligences. After 5 intensive and solitary years of work on the project, Inman had brought in his close friend, brilliant and pugnacious Stanford University professor of psychology, Frank Layton. Together they had experimented tirelessly in the pursuit of something they were both convinced was bigger than the A-bomb, the law of gravity, and the theory of relativity rolled into one. And now, at last, contact had apparently been made. We are the 9. Trust us. We received your Voyager message. We've come to help. The alien voice sounded soothing and hypnotic. Though in a carefully controlled, altered state of consciousness, Inman felt a sense of exhilaration. The Voyager message? Incredible. So they're out there. The thoughts raced by in rapid succession as he felt himself being drawn into a vortex of magnetic consciousness, such as he had never imagined existed. Breathing heavily and fighting to control the tremor in his fingers, Frank Layton darted probing glances at the deeply tranced figure before him. The massive reclining chair into which Ken was strapped was completely covered by a thick plexiglass pyramid reaching almost to the laboratory's high ceiling. A maze of wires led from a close-fitting plastic helmet on Ken's head and from numerous positions on his body to an imposing array of electronic wizardry directly beside him. From there, 2 large computer cables fed into the monitoring equipment located outside the pyramid. The entire setup was mounted on a pentagram-shaped metal platform. This, a launching pad for journeys into inner space, as Ken and Frank affectionately called their secret laboratory, was located about 10 minutes from Stanford University. You are entering the superluminal. Relax. The voice sent cold fingers of panic clutching at Layton's throat and chest. This is it, the payoff to years of hard work. Ken lay motionless, his face now a death mask. The monitors showed that the trance state had quickly deepened far beyond anything previously attained. Pulse rate and blood pressure had dropped to 35 per minute and 80/40, respectively. For a moment, Layton verged on panic, cursing the paranoia of secrecy that had forbidden the presence of a medical doctor during these dangerous sessions. We've been watching your development. We're here to help you take the next step. But there's a mental barrier blocking us. Open up. There's nothing to fear. In spite of the assuring words and mesmerizing cadence, something chilling had interjected itself into the metallic voice coming over the speaker. Layton felt the hair on the back of his neck rising. Keep calm. Get hold of yourself. It's the electronics that makes it sound weird. Steady, Ken. Layton's eyes swept from Ken to the needles and graphs and back again. He wiped a damp hand across his forehead. To reach the omega point, where human intelligence interfaces with the infinite, you must drop the barrier surrounding the self. Drop the barrier. The commanding voice compelled obedience. To his consternation, Layton noticed that Ken had begun to fight his way back to normal consciousness. Convulsively, he struggled against the straps holding him in place. A hollow moan escaped the rigid mouth. Blood pressure and pulse rate took a quick upward jump. Layton watched helplessly as the monitors signaled a weakening of the deep trance state. Drop the barrier. The otherworldly voice had lost its seductive quality and had taken on a harsh, authoritarian tone. No! The cry erupting from Ken's throat sounded more animal than human. He was fighting his restraints desperately now, like a drowning man trying to come up for air. You must open yourself. Drop the barrier. The barrier. The voice was louder, more insistent, but disjointed, as though the connection were being maintained with great difficulty. No! A terrifying scream ripped the air. Oh God, no! The bank of monitoring needles fluctuated madly for a few seconds, then began a steady ascent back to normal and beyond. Cursing under his breath, Layton pushed a button and the plexiglass pyramid began to tilt in a smooth motion over onto its side and away from him. The contact they had dreamed of, worked for, and had achieved at last was slipping away. Ken's eyes opened wildly and his head moved erratically, as though he were desperately searching the room for something or someone. Panic was clearly written in every contorted feature as he strained in vain against the heavy straps holding him. Blood pressure and pulse rate had both shot up above 200. Now they began a slow descent as his eyes at last focused on Layton, who was working swiftly to remove the electronic connections from his body before undoing the control straps. Ken, I don't believe it. Why did you hold back just when you reached Omega? Why? Hold back? Did I? Even in his still disoriented condition, Ken was shocked by the reproach in his colleague's voice. Deliberately, he shook his head to clear it. What are you saying? We were there, and then you started fighting it. You don't remember? Fighting? I don't know. It felt like something was trying to take over my mind. It was horrible. A shudder shook Ken's body. He clutched his head with both hands, sickened and bewildered, struggling to recall the details of a horrendous nightmare that seemed to hover just beyond his grasp. Impatiently, Leighton reached over to the recording console beside Ken and alternately punched the rewind and fast-forward buttons. Garbled sounds punctuated the tense atmosphere. At last, he found what he was searching for. Here it is. We're making history. Listen to this. You're nearing Omega. Steady now. Let yourself go. We're taking you deeper. Deeper. At the first sound of the voice, Ken's body jerked convulsively, and a groan escaped his contorted lips. Leighton pushed the pause button momentarily, then released it. We are the Nine. Trust us. We received your Voyager message. We've come to help. You are entering the superluminal. Relax. We've been watching your development. We're here to help you take the next step. But there's a mental barrier blocking us. Open up. There's nothing to fear. Leighton watched his colleague carefully. Ken's body shook uncontrollably as the insistent voice continued. To reach the Omega point where human intelligence interfaces with the infinite, you must drop the barrier surrounding the self. Drop the barrier. Drop the barrier. The voice seemed to fill the room. No! The sound of his own voice screaming hysterically was like an explosion inside Ken's head. The pain jerked him violently against the restraining straps. Reaching out in panic, Ken turned off the recorder and started pulling frantically at the buckles. Wait, I'll get you out. Leighton put a firm hand on Ken's shoulder and pushed him down. Ken was trembling. He had the eyes of a trapped animal. Something was grabbing at my mind again. He took several deep breaths, exhaling slowly, trying to calm himself. It's horrible. I never expected this, Frank. Who are these Nine? Why did I sense danger? Something repulsive. Methodically, Leighton unstrapped him, shaking his head in unmistakable disapproval as he did so. I don't understand what you're saying. It's just incomprehensible. The fear and confusion in Ken's eyes caused Leighton to ease off a bit. Can you handle any more? He asked. You ought to listen to the rest of it right now while it's fresh. You might remember something. Ken settled back in the chair and nodded reluctantly. Okay, let's give it another try. Leighton turned the recorder on. You must open yourself. Drop the barrier. The barrier. The voice was fading in and out. No, oh God, no! It was a scream wrenched from the pit of hell. Ken gripped the arms of his chair, trying to hang on to his sanity until the terrifying but indistinct images passed. Leighton turned off the recorder. We lost the pattern right there. We worked for years for this moment. Gone was the momentary empathy he had felt. The stakes were too high. There was no excuse for what Ken had done. Once again, he made no attempt to disguise the disappointment and resentment he felt. He was peering over his glasses at Ken, but not with the detached clinical expression so familiar to the students in his graduate psychology courses at Stanford. A great prize had slipped through their grasp. Frustrated anger was boiling inside of him. Why did you fight it? Why? Leighton's question loomed like a palpable presence in the room. We had it, Ken. I told you it was like something alive and terribly alien was trying to take over, to possess me. I can't explain it. Ken's voice trailed away. Leighton shook his head adamantly. Ken, they said they got the Voyager message and came here to help us. Do you realize what that means? The opportunity we just blew? So it's my fault, is it? I'm sorry, but you don't know what it was like. I was watching every flicker of those needles, Leighton insisted. And I'm telling you, there was no indication of any harmful effect on any of the monitors until you began to resist. That's when things went wrong. Ken bristled. I resent being blamed for this, Frank. You think I screamed like that for no reason? That's not like me, but I heard it, and so did you. You're not expressing anything concrete, Ken, just vague and subjective feelings that reflect only your own internal state of mind, but not what was actually happening. Leighton's tone had become clinical, as though he were analyzing a patient or a student. I was watching the monitors, and there was nothing. Ken cut him off angrily. I don't care what the monitor showed. I was being sucked into something hideously repulsive beyond description. I can't explain it, but it was terrifying. I hear what you're saying, Ken, and I'm trying to sympathize with your feelings. I'm sure they were real to you. We can't let it happen next time. You were at the omega point, a dream come true, and then you pulled yourself out. You think I'm not just as disappointed as you are? I conceived this thing and brought you into it. So get off my back. Okay, Leighton half apologized. We'll try again whenever you're ready. It should be easier next time. Next time? Yeah, maybe, but I'd rather not think about it right now. Ken's pleading eyes and contorted face reflected the panic of unreasoning terror. You can do it, said Leighton soothingly. Now it was his turn to panic. Surely Ken wouldn't back out. You'll get over this with a good night's sleep. Maybe this was a fluke. Maybe next time will be a breeze. Frank put his hand on Ken's arm only to have it brushed off. Maybe you'd like to trade places with me next time. I'd be happy to if it made any sense, returned Leighton earnestly. But you trained yourself for years, psychedelics, yoga, Zen. How long would it take me? Come on, Ken, I've never known you to be a quitter. Get off my case, will you? I'll try again, of course I will. But I need some time. Ken stood resolutely to his feet, his tall, athletic frame towering over his companion. They were quite a contrast. Leighton obviously liked his liquor and rich foods too much. I've got to get out of here, muttered Ken, as much to himself as to Leighton. He shook his head again, then held it in both hands. Wincing at the pain and confusion, still shaking his head, he staggered out the laboratory door and slammed it behind him. Leighton made a few hesitant steps to follow, then stopped. He stood still, the sound of the slamming door echoing in his memory. Caught up in a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, he surveyed the lab that Ken's genius and perseverance had built. It had become his own magnificent obsession as well. We made contact. The thought brought a fierce exhilaration. He went quickly to a phone on a nearby desk and punched a number that he never called except from locations where it couldn't be traced to him. The phone rang and rang. Finally, an efficient female voice on the other end answered, CIA. Leighton cleared his throat. Hawkins, please. Who shall I tell him is calling? Tell him it's Herbert George Wells, with the big news he's been waiting for.